Kenyans are sending more funds from the diaspora back home. According to data for January, 60 billion shillings, about $412 million, a 5.3% climb. The largest source of it, of course, is from the United States, accounting for 54% of the diaspora inflows into Kenya. For December of 2023, 54.3 billion shillings, amounting to about $372 million. Also, Eurobonds, Kenya returning to the Eurobond market. You can see a 7-year note there maturing 2031. $1.5 billion is what Kenya sought. 10.375% coupon. They got about $5 billion in orders, showing that it was oversubscribed. The proceeds are going to be used to clear out a bond, a $2 billion bond, which is maturing in 2024. Also, Kenya is looking to, according to the Star, which is based in Nairobi, to wipe out about, or rather reduce ghost workers to the tune of about 20,000 of them, which it hopes will improve not only transparency, but also revenues coming in to the government, where to actually be saving on money which is going towards these ghost workers. And then to Nigeria, capital importation coming in, falling by 26% year on year, $3.9 billion. Portfolio investments coming in at $1.1 billion by being cut in half. Foreign direct investment, $377 million. Joining us from Johannesburg to discuss further, Yvonne Mhango. She's the Africa economist with Bloomberg. Yvonne, good afternoon to you. Thank you so much for being with us. I guess.
Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. What do you make of the debate over Kenya's latest foray into the Eurobond market?
Okay, so it was partly expected. Kenya has a Eurobond that's due in June. They have to pay $2 billion, and they had a few options in terms of how to raise funding for that. And one of them was a buyback as well as refinancing. And it appears as though they managed to raise $1.44 billion in order to repay that Eurobond. So I'm sure you've seen the currency appreciate significantly following that, and yields drop as the market eases in terms of anxiety about the country's ability to repay its Eurobond.
Indeed. Now, opinions are split, though. If we look at Eurobond, I guess Eurobond issuances from, I guess, the likes of Benin Republic and also the Ivory Coast, they are cheaper in terms of the rate, the coupon rate, than the 10% that Kenya has. So yeah, Kenya 10.35, Ivory Coast at 8.5. So I guess some are saying that they're worried about additional debt being piled on Kenya. What do you make of those worries? Are they legitimate?
Okay, so there are 2 points here. So I think the first one is on why the yield was much higher on the Kenya bond than we saw from the West African issuances. And I think that speaks to the trend that we're seeing. This is the first time in 2 years we're seeing African countries come back to market and issue Eurobonds. So it's already in itself telling you that we're turning a cycle. However, the first countries that will be able to raise funding are those with relatively more robust, stronger macros, and that Cote d'Ivoire is a good example of that. The other countries that will be coming to market this year, those that are seeking to refinance because they have to pay for bonds that are due, and Kenya falls into that bucket. So it's not completely a surprise that Kenya has had to pay a lot more than Cote d'Ivoire, given the timing. We are still in a high interest rate environment, and in this environment, investors are pretty selective. They'll go for countries with good fundamentals like Cote d'Ivoire, and in Kenya's case, countries that are showing reforms, but they'll still make them pay a premium, given that those reforms still have to bear fruit.
Could Kenya have gotten funding from the IMF, concessionary loans? There's also that argument they could have gotten it at less, what do you make of that suggestion?
So Kenya has raised significantly a significant amount of funding from the multilaterals, including the IMF, the World Bank, and other multilaterals. I guess what we're seeing in this, yes, it has been a bit of a surprise at how much was raised from the Eurobond market in order to refinance. But I guess what that represents or reflects is that Kenya has significant obligations that are due aside from the Eurobond. So in addition to the significant amount of funds they've raised from the multilaterals, they still needed more from private creditors in order to be able to meet their obligations.
Another matter in Kenya, ghost workers. The Nairobi-based Star saying the nation plans to remove about 20,000 ghost workers from payrolls. Do you think that's going to have an impact? What do you make of that move?
Yes, so this is part of Kenya's efforts to go through fiscal consolidation. Which is the reforms I was speaking to, and that often involves either growing your revenue base, and we've seen them do that through higher taxes, or cutting spending. And the wage bill, as you know, tends to be the biggest item in government's budgets, and ghost workers is an easy way of trying to reduce that. That's if you're able to identify where those are. So the fact that they have a number to it means they have done their audits, and through those audits, they should be able to see the payroll costs go down.
Well, why do ghost workers, why do you think this issue keeps thriving in Africa? Nigeria has a ghost worker issue, South Africa, Cameroon, Mozambique. Well, is it technology adoption? Why do you think this issue keeps popping up?
Yes, we do see technology adoption will make it easier in order to reduce those numbers. So I think in most cases, part of the reason we have ghost workers is we do get civil servants that do pass on, but their salary continues to be paid out into their accounts, and they may have spouses or family members that have access to those and continue to draw down on that. And I guess it does require technology to improve in order to reduce incidence of those.
I want to get to Nigeria now, and those latest capital importation figures, 26% drop for the total, FDI falling. Yeah, I guess why should the average Nigerian be worried about those numbers falling?
They should be worrying because if you've got a slowdown in foreign financial inflows, it does imply that your currency continues to come under pressure. So that decline you're seeing both in FDI and also portfolio inflows for 2023 is a reflection of the macro environment. Firstly, the fact that the economy is not growing fast enough to attract investors. Secondly, the fact that investors remain concerned about their ability to repatriate their dollars. And as long as those concerns continue to be in place, you will see investment flows decline. What's encouraging is that we are beginning to see reforms out of Nigeria. However, we need to see consistency in those. So we are encouraged by the fact that the backlog has started to be paid down in terms of the foreign exchange backlog. We're encouraged by the fact that we have an MPC meeting coming up this month for the first time since July of last year, which implies we should see some pretty big rate hikes given how high inflation is. And we're also encouraged by the fact that there's been a convergence in the parallel and official exchange rates.
So I guess, well, you preempted my next question. What does the government need to do to try to get more FDI in? Is it pretty much move along with the reforms?
Correct. So we need to see consistency in that. So we saw last year they did devalue the currency, but that in itself did not solve the foreign exchange problem because the backlog, which at the time was around $7 billion, continued to exist. But the government has seemed to had made a concerted effort to reduce that. Interest rates also need to be much higher for positive real rates to be restored. Investors are not going to invest in fixed income, that's treasury bills or bonds, if they're getting negative real rates as a return out of it. So there needs to be a confluence of measures and policies put together, and there needs to be consistency in that. And once investors see that demonstrated, they should be more comfortable returning to Nigeria.
All right, finally, just before we go, speaking of FX inflows, we saw a record number for Kenya in January. I guess, is that a good, what do you make of it? A good sign of things to come for Kenya as far as diaspora inflows?
It is encouraging. What was interesting during the pandemic, when many feared that we'd see a slowdown in remittances, there was actually a pickup. And I think that reflects the fact that a lot of this is going to family members. So they're trying to sustain that support, particularly in tough times. But I think another reason we're seeing an increase in early this year for Kenya is these instruments that you're seeing being issued, offering quite attractive returns. You mentioned, I think, the infrastructure bond, and other such instruments domestically, which are offering yields in the high teens. And Kenya being entrepreneurial and savvy investors, I'm sure, were pretty keen to participate in those assets.
Yvonne Mhango, Africa economist with Bloomberg. Always a pleasure talking to you about the Africa issues. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.